everyone, and welcome to another Monday Motivation. I'm your host, Daniel Krakowski, joined as always by the gentleman.
The gentleman.
The thriving gentleman.
The thriving.
Goran Vasevich.
How's it going, everybody? What's up, Daniel?
Not too much.
Thanks for showing up.
Oh, yeah, always.
Bright and early on a Friday that's going to be fun-filled with excitement.
You like my suit?
Yeah, you guys can't see it, but, I mean, this guy's sitting right across from me, and he's got the get-up, the suit jacket. He's got the little napkin, what's it called?
Pocket square?
Yeah, the pocket square.
Got my Coca-Cola Zero here.
Got the Coca-Cola Zero. He's ready.
Battling for a sponsorship.
I'm still waiting on my
endorsement deal?
No, on my Celsius, which is arriving probably 12 o'clock today.
Oh, my gosh.
So I'm going to pounce on that. But later on, we have that huge Bridgewater event, which is going to be crazy.
Yeah, last year it was insane, and I'm sure they're ratcheting it up even more.
Yeah, I'm going to have to save some room in my belly for all the food.
Yes. Yeah,
Exciting.
There's going to be a lot of stuff happening.
I hope you guys are excited too. And if you're not, then get excited.
So this week I kind of went down a rabbit hole and was listening to Jordan Peterson, who's a lecturer at the University of Toronto, and I believe he's an evolutionary psychologist. But basically, he was really getting into economic systems and how they function in general. And I think most people are familiar with the 80-20 rule, the Pareto Principle. And for those of you who don't, basically it says that 20% of people in a given field typically produce about 80% of the result.
Yep.
You can look at it as a real estate investor and say that 20% of your portfolio likely produces you 80% of your profit. You can also reverse it.
Potentially, and that's
very likely.
Right.
And I think, a lot of people don't think that's the case, but I would challenge you if you haven't taken a hard look at the actual financials for each property, do that, and you may discover that there's a lot of inefficiency in your system.
Yeah, I think that was a case on our business level from a customer perspective.
Yeah, no doubt, and that's kind of how we could apply it. As we looked at the properties that we were actively managing and found that roughly the bottom 20% took 80% of our resources, time, et cetera, for us to be able to manage.
Right.
The idea originally was put place by this guy who was looking at, I believe it was sprouts, beans, something like that. And it was the only reason I bring that up is his argument was it's something intrinsic in nature, where it's not necessarily just something that we as humans, with our flawed understanding of the world and the distribution of wealth, the inequality that potentially can exist within a system is something that we're fabricating. They're saying no, that this is repeated in many, many different places. So the real value and how you can apply that to your business is, say you're in sales to some capacity. Mm-hmm. If you look at and break down your week and you say, hey, I have 40 hours this week, and of that time, I allocated 5 here, 10 here, 4 here, 7 here. Number one, just by looking at what you're spending time on, you're going to get a much clearer picture of where some inefficiencies may lay for you, right? Yep. Because most people just kind of do what they do, and they don't think about the actual structure of their week.
Yeah, I think it's also important to note that it doesn't matter if it's customer or if it's your time or whatever. The 80-20 rule kind of, you want to have that in the forefront in the beginning. And, from my experience and just from a customer service perspective, we start off a relationship at one level, but then it goes down. So I think it's important to keep reevaluating the relationship that you have, or the business structure that you have, in order that you to see that you are adhering to that principle. Because a lot of times we've had customers that were very good, but then it went the opposite way because our business model has changed and we failed to reevaluate, and therefore got caught in the 80-20 trap. Right. So I think it's important to know that, first of all, know what what your business is all about, what you're doing, and then reapply that principle at least, every quarter.
Yeah, definitely. Constant reevaluation is going to be what helps you.
But talk about your rabbit hole, and is this some kind of a realization that you had? Did you go down?
I did, and I'll kind of get there, but there's a little bit more runway that I want to get to. So basically the component of analyzing your business, whatever that may be, and looking at it is if you can identify that 20% of your time that you're spending that is producing you the most result, it really helps you to focus and, potentially say 20% of the time I'm out there actively engaging with the public, trying to get customers in my sales position for some company. If I can delegate that other 80% to someone else, or hire an assistant to take care of that, or I may find that it's not even necessary, it's going to really allow my business to expand, because I can take this, what I'm doing 20% of my time in, now move it to maybe 80, right? And potentially quadrupling my production. Once you do that, you have this new system in place, and realistically, you can reapply the same concept. So say you get to, 20% of your time was spent doing something that's more productive than the rest, that's producing so much of your result, and you devote 100% of your time now to that original 20% activity. You're doing 5 times more of that activity. You should be getting 5 times more of that result. It may not scale 1-to-1, but it will improve your productivity. Now you have this new system. So this is your first kind of iteration. You've done it for the first time, and you're operating more efficiently. The argument then is you can go back and reapply this concept and find the 20% most efficient use of that time.
So you can get...
And now what was before the top 4% of your production is what you're trying to focus your entire production on, right? Because 20% and 20% gives you 4%. So you're just honing down and getting more and more and more efficient over time. And the difficulty, and this is here where the realization came in to me, because we were bringing on new agents, doing a lot of stuff, where we were having additional employees around VSM, and there was some inefficiency created through that. So there's a law called Price's Law. And basically what that states is that the square root of the number of people within any given system are going to produce 50% of the results within that system. So, you can look at it in general economics, but if you just look at it in terms of running a business, it's saying that if we have 10 employees, then the square root of that would be, let's call it 3, right? So we have 3 employees who are producing 50% of the result, 50% of the return, and the other 7 are operating clearly less efficiently, right? And if you look at that as a ratio, it's like, okay, less than half of the people, like a third of the people are really doing something. But what's very interesting about it is, say I scale up to 100 people. Now the square root is 10. So now 10% of my people are producing 50% of my result. So, as companies grow, scale, and add people, it's very, very easy for them to get less and less efficient.
Exactly.
And I'm sure you felt that over time.
Because I think the standard notion, it just makes sense when you're like, hey, if one person's doing such a great job, I just times that by 10, 100, 1,000, and I should achieve similar, if not the same result. But a lot of times that's not the case because of that.
And maybe it's my limited understanding of these kinds, because they're new concepts to me. But I would argue that if you're adding people to your organization, then the evaluations that you do yearly, bi-yearly, however often you do them, become so important, because that's going to be the tool to allow you to weed out so many of the inefficiencies in your system. So say we have 100 people and 10 of them are producing 50% of the result. You can very easily assume if 90 people are producing the same amount of as 10 people, that there's some inefficiencies in these 90 people and some people aren't pulling their weight at all. And you can apply the 80-20 rule, go back and try and find the 20% who are costing you 80% of your time, money, et cetera, and streamline your business.
I think one of the kind of the principles or the strategies behind the 80-20 rule is to basically find out, let's say, what the 20% are doing that are making, you know, the bulk of your business happen, and to replicate those systems and processes. But by having that kind of in your sites, it's a little bit easier versus you're just kind of saying, hey, I just have X amount of people. Some are doing well, some are not doing well. That's okay. I'm not going to go deeper into it. And the notion is that if you can, you know, let's say you start with 10, 2 are doing great. You talk to the 2 that are doing great and see what they're doing. And now out of your 10, you know, maybe 4 are doing better, but then you scale up to 20 people, and now it goes from 4 to 8, and so forth and so forth. So it's about, I think, trying to scale, but then every time you scale, you use the efficiencies and the best practices in order to kind of exponentially grow your percentage. So hopefully one day would be 100 out of 100, but you know, how impossible is that?
Well, I think a lot of people a lot of our listeners are people out there who are own their own businesses to some capacity.
Yep.
And I guess a really important takeaway is that the people who are working and producing for your company tend to grow linearly. So on the scale of 10 to 100 employees, we went from 3 to 10 productive employees, whereas your unproductive, your inefficient employees, we'll call them, right? Well, however we're defining this right now, that grows exponentially.
Right.
So there's, there's no direct one-to-one correlation. So when you decide to scale, I think you need to really have a reason why you want to do that, because there are going to be additional drains on the business. And I've spoken to many people who have, they're like a 60 employee company. And they're like, I just realized that I've been making the same amount of money with my 65 employees as I did with 10.
Yeah.
But now I have way more headaches and a lot more people are relying on me to stay around and keep doing what I'm doing.
Right.
So, how can we really apply that then? It becomes difficult. And I think one thing that I also can take away and probably extrapolate and infer from this is that if you're a manager, because this, let's assume Price's Law just applies universally throughout all systems, you just are unfortunately going to be encountering people that you don't have the ability to bring up to the level that you want them to. You just have to either part ways, figure something else out, put them in a position where their inefficiencies doesn't affect you, however that may be. If there's some way you can put them on salary so that the time that they're spending isn't relevant, it's just the job being completed, something like that. But what's really, really interesting about it too is I think if you understand that idea, you can kind of look out into the world too and understand some of the inequalities that exist out in just the general landscape too. And it's tough because it's obviously a sensitive subject for a lot of people, but just like in the business world, out in the real world, I think this is something that is occurring on a regular basis and that all people should be mindful of, that there's going to be people who are just generally more productive and people who are going to be way, way less productive on a huge continuum. And finding a way to kind of compromise between those two to make a society that works.
Right. I think it's a combination of, choosing to compromise and or choose to kind of coach and lead people that are on one level to bring them to the next level, and it's really up to a company or organization if they want to focus or choose to do that.
Right.
So going back to you, did you come to a realization where you're like, hey, the 20% of my time is spent here. How do I, times this by 5 and eliminate the rest, all my time wasting? Was that a realization that you came to, or?
Yeah, definitely. A big part of the realization that I had was that I'm spending a lot of time working on transactions and deals because my infrastructure is pretty good, so I don't feel like I have a ton of difficulty finding people to work with.
Yep.
I have, lists of 1,000 people who've contacted me through our marketing efforts and stuff, and I don't really have time to call them, so I hand that off to someone else. But the type of client that I can devote my time to is changing slightly, and it's going to be a lot more investor-oriented, a lot more seasoned investor-oriented, and looking at larger properties and buildings. Right,
and there's nothing wrong with that. I think the success in you realizing this early will actually benefit you and your customer. A lot of people want to do something, but then they also have this ongoing business where they still want to do it because it provides them an income, but the result is subpar job for both parties.
Right.
And I think you're doing it and approaching it the right way, where you draw clear lines and you devote 100% of your time and attention to a specific, client or whatever specific business type that's to your liking and to your benefit and
to my passion, really.
To your passion, exactly. So I think that's 100% important, and everyone, if you are not analyzing of the 80-20 rule daily, you should be, because I think your productivity level is going to go up, and not just in business, and in friendships.
Absolutely.
Yes.
One kind of quick caveat that I'll add in here is, if you're just starting out in a new industry, a new field, I would say get to that capacity point before you really start looking back, because I know real estate agents, as an example, it's just what we know, where they'll come in and they're like, I'm only dealing with this type of client. I only want to do this type of deal. And it's like, okay. And then a year later, how many transactions have you done? 0.
Right.
And you're wondering how they managed to stay alive for a year with no income. And at the beginning, I think it's great to take on everything that you can. It's going to be a learning experience. It's going to put you in front of all kinds of different people.
You're going to figure out what you like and what you don't like, especially if you're going to a field that you don't know or that you're new to.
Right. But it's also almost impossible to analyze the efficiency for yourself in some system, in some market, without engaging in that market for some period of time first, because you have no conclusions to draw. You have no data points.
Yeah, you're understanding. I think, depending on one's experience level in business or in life, I always like to focus, you can still apply the 80-20 rule to yourself, right? So if you're going into this business venture, you're not going to say, you know what, I'm only going to deal with $10 million plus clients, right? That you look at it from a perspective of, what is the best utilization of my time for me to get to my goal or to find out what my passion is. So I think that managing yourself and managing your time, utilizing your time, and how each and every day or minute and hours are spent is what you can focus on as your efficiency. Is it efficient for me to watch YouTube for 3 hours, or is it more efficient for me to watch or listen to audiobooks and or make phone calls or engage people through email or whatnot?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more that really you're always competing against the best version of yourself.
Right.
And if you can use some framework like this to analyze and find out what that looks like and what that is, you're going to be at a huge advantage. And if you're not, you're really doing yourself a disservice, and you're just going to be in that 80%. So I encourage everyone to try and get in that 20%. And thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.